Hi and welcome to a proper KSP2 video this time. This one's not a joke, it's not a rickroll anymore. And we are starting in the vehicle assembly building with, as you can see, a complete Soyuz vehicle. First I wanted to apologize because I don't have a time lapse of the Soyuz build. I assure you it is 100% stock. If anybody wants, you can have my craft file, just let me know. But I was just testing some things in the VAB. I was trying to build like a mock-up of the Soyuz vehicle, and I ended up building the whole thing, and it wasn't as easy as it seems, but it's fairly simple to build, honestly. You can probably replicate that just by looking at it. So moving on, we created our lander that is gonna allow us to land on one of the moons. I'm not gonna tell you which one or where we're going, but you probably know from the title. So we need to construct the rest of the N1 rocket. It's worth mentioning this is my second iteration of the N1, as the first one where I started building from the bottom kinda ended up in the dump because I couldn't get it to work. It was unstable, it was exploding all the time. You see, placing the fairing. I will be placing the same fairing like 5 more times. But yeah, I started with the engine section. I first went for 12 meters diameter because, you know, the N1 is huge, it's humongous. It's a big old rocket. Like, the real version is 17 meters across, I think. Yeah, it would be 70 meters. And I scaled it down to 12 first. I couldn't get it to work. So this one is scaled down to more proper Kerbal size. It's going to be 1075 meters to be exact. Yeah, I'm glad this one is actually stable enough to fly. I couldn't get the wobbliness to go away. Not like entirely, but you will see me adding, actually no, you won't see me adding struts because I cut that part out, because it was literally 1 hour of just me placing struts, both in the interstage decouplers, you know, these iconic truss structure decouplers, and some struts that actually hold stuff together so it wouldn't necessarily explode or wobble. Honestly, if you can tolerate all the wobbliness, all the glitches, it was actually a pleasure building this rocket. It is complicated, it is challenging, and therefore it was fun. It wasn't as easy as my Saturn V, which is by far the best rocket I've ever built in KSP2, and probably in KSP in general. This one, however, required a tad more finesse, and not necessarily a ton, just quite a bit of part glitching, especially in the aft section that you'll see me build here in a moment. We are currently trying to get the mid-section to work. It is going to work. It's not gonna decouple properly though, which is kind of funny because the first time I flew it, it actually went incredibly well. Everything decoupled, every single engine lit up, and of course it did light up because it's KSP, there's no failures on the engines. But I was able to get it to work properly the very first time before I started recording, like in the initial engineering phase test, whatever you want to call it. And then when I hit the record button, of course I reverted the rocket back to the launch pad, but when I hit record, it was seemingly going fine. And then when I wanted to decouple the second stage, after it was empty, it was just stuck to my first stage, and my delta V went really down because the mass is still there. Even though you decouple the part, the mass stays. And yeah, I checked. Oh, this is one of the longest parts of the rocket, like building the truss decoupler. We don't have these parts in KSP yet, like we did in KSP1. I think they're gonna add it. I don't know. I'm not sure. But I made the decouplers out of struts, and as we all know, struts are the single laggiest part in this game except for lit up engines. And I'd say I used probably hundreds, and I mean hundreds, of struts only to get the trusses looking like the real one and to get it somewhat stable, especially the bottom part and the Soyuz craft and the fairing at the top of the stack. Now this is one of the most clipped in parts in the whole rocket, because the whole bottom or the aft part, as you wish, has to get clipped into the upper fairing, so it actually looks legitimately like the real one. So I'm just gonna add some tanks for stability and additional fuel, because as you can see, most of the fairing inside is actually empty. It would be overkill to use as many fuel tanks. Besides, the TWR was actually pretty good, and it wouldn't be so great if I actually decided to use a proper amount of fuel. But with the tanks in place, we can go ahead and build the engines. And as you probably know, or don't, the real N1 used exactly 30 engines in the first stage, or the block A, as it's called. I tried. I did try to use the same amount of engines, but it wouldn't yield any better results. It would actually burn up fuel quicker and wouldn't get us anywhere else in a better fashion. So we trimmed it down to 22 engines, and for some reason the staging is all over the place. So I'm gonna have to quickly clean that up, because we ended up with like 50 stages, which is definitely not a good thing. I was ultimately able to figure out the proper way to do it, and our engines could be placed properly, kind of flush with the fairing, except for the middle 6 engines. Again, as it was the case with the real N1 rocket that the Soviets built years and years ago. We can strut the fuel tanks together with the engine plates, and after testing and adding struts off camera, we can skip all the way to launch and lift off. The TWR is approximately 1.7 or 1.6 in the final version, so it isn't as bad as it might seem, and definitely not as bad as I thought it's gonna be. It's actually quite nice to fly. And now, as you see, I made some changes to the whole rocket structure. Not necessarily the core structure, but I added these little vents on the sides of first and second stage as the real one, and we also have these 4 grid fins at the aft end. Oh, the rocket is so wobbly. I forgot how wobbly it was when I flew it. But yeah, the whole Soyuz craft that is placed on top of the lander inside the fairing at the top of the stack, it is the wobbliest part, except for, I think, the interstage, like the second stage decoupler. I just couldn't get it to stay, or just couldn't make it not wobble, to be fair. So I'm going for a steep ascent profile, since we're going to the Joolian system. And here we go, separation. It was beautiful. It was buttery smooth, this one. And we continue onwards. And at this point, I'm thinking, oh, it's all going great, nice. We're gonna have a pretty ascent, a nice video and all. And, well, we are about to burn up all the fuel in this stage, and we're gonna have to decouple. And that's now, yeah, this one's going great, except for that little quick load. And yeah, there we go. That's the issue I told you about. So I tried quick loading multiple times, as you see. I also tried restarting the game. It sadly didn't fix anything. I'm also trying to spin the the rocket into pieces, basically, or time warping. And I just kept on spamming the quick load button, and I finally at last realized it's all in vain. So we're just gonna have to roll with it. And basically we have a ton of dead weight or dead mass on our tail that affects our delta V significantly, but at last it's not gonna change the outcome of the mission. You probably know from the poll I made, because I asked you guys if I should do one thing or the other. I'm not gonna reveal it yet, but you probably know. And on that note, we can just plan and execute our maneuver node, basically get into proper orbit, experience some paused and pause glitches, and make another maneuver node that will bring us out of the sphere of influence of Kerbal and near our target, which is Jool, which was Eeloo at first, but the game basically I don't wanna say shit itself, but it did. So I had to switch the target and go to Jool, to one of the Joolian moons. And I guess I can say where we're going now. We're going to POL. This is N1 rocket to POL. At first I tried using the transfer window planner like you would for KSP1, but I think it doesn't really work as expected, at least not yet. It's not as accurate as I would like, but at least, hey, we were able to decouple or I guess deploy the fairing and get rid of the launch escape system. The Soyuz also has these nice solar panels extended now, and the antennas that kind of make up the docking system. We can spin around a bit. To be honest, I'm not exactly sure what I was doing in the game. It just looks like I'm clicking Q and E. I was probably eating or drinking at that point. But we can finally begin our escape burn, and we finally got rid of both stages, and we are way lighter than we were before, but we are still kind of low on delta V. And if it wasn't for a particular glitch or basically the whole save file getting broken, I would have been okay on delta V. It would be kind of thin. We would have been literally on point with our fuel, but it would have been possible, entirely possible, to get back to Kerbal. But you're gonna see what happened and why I wasn't able to necessarily get back. So what's going on in the game? We are plotting our maneuver node to the Joolian system. I was planning on swinging around Eeloo and circularizing for free, but the game had other plans, so I just went for a pretty low Jool periapsis so that we can use the Obert effect and circularize for way cheaper. And in the meantime, I think I pressed the spacebar or the staging button twice instead of once, and we decoupled our Soyuz capsule. And what I wanted to do is undock the Soyuz from the lander and dock it the other way around, so kind of the Apollo style, I guess. I'm actually surprised how successful the docking was. The game didn't crash and the ship wasn't destroyed, so I call it a success. Now, as you see, I'm aiming for Eeloo a little bit. I will get some weird encounter at a point, but I'm also trying to be as close to Jool as possible. And yeah, that was our Eeloo encounter, I believe. That will put us on our circular orbit, but that orbit didn't last too long. So I think what happened was there was some discrepancy in our burn or just the in-game math, and it didn't necessarily calculate our orbital line properly. It's kind of on point, and yeah, now we're getting out of the sphere of influence of Jool. I basically gave up the idea of circularizing using Eeloo gravity assist, and I'm trying to get some rough Jool perigee where we can swing around Jool and burn as little fuel as possible to stay in the Joolian system. We can finally skip to the part where we are entering the Joolian system. We are in the sphere of influence, of course, and we can circularize for way cheaper than we would be able to if we went for any higher orbit. Now, since we are almost empty in the lower stage, we're gonna use the rest of the remaining fuel to do the burn. Some nice Jool and lathe shots in the background. Wow, we have to go to lathe. So we can use the remaining fuel here, and we're gonna detach the lower stage, and we are left just with the Soyuz and the lander as the remaining spacecraft. And now we technically have not enough fuel, but as you can see, the readout is entirely incorrect. It shows 316 meters per second of delta V remaining, which is way lower than what we actually have. Soyuz alone has over 3000 meters per second of fuel, plus we have a huge surplus of liquid fuel aboard the lander that is gonna be landing on POL and returning, and we will transfer its fuel back into Soyuz, so we're gonna be basically full, meaning we have over 3000 meters per second to get back to Kerbal after we are done with the mission. And I know you can easily get back to Kerbal with that much fuel. You basically have to raise your apogee in the Joolian system a little bit so that it crosses some orbital lines of its moons, and you are finally going to be put into a stable Joolian orbit, and basically it will kick you out of the system at some point using basically just gravity assist, and you will end up in the solar orbit where the road back to Kerbal is basically straight. We will get back to going back to Kerbal a little bit later, because now we are about to circularize around POL, and that means we need to burn a little bit more, but the burn is very cheap. We can stabilize our orbit, get it low enough, and detach the lander, where we're going to be finally landing after loading a quick save, because something wrong actually happened, and we're gonna lose our Soyuz vehicle once. Because it's just the orbit itself, even though the SAS are off, the RCS are off, and the engine is off. Oh yeah, and we went into the ground in there. And I was kind of hoping Val would be able to walk on surface of POL and not just glitch underneath, like into the ground, and we can see basically everything around POL. But I like the colors of the moon, don't you? It looks way better than KSP-1. It kinda like a mossy, kinda radioactive surface of a planet in No Man's Sky. I feel like, oh, a nice touchdown as well, damn. So we can jump around a little bit. We are going to have to plant our flag, of course, because that's the most important activity that you can do on Celestial Body. We're going to fly around a little bit more, see what's going on, see what's behind the mountain, what rocks are we dealing with. Yeah, this is kind of interesting. If you know what type of rock that might be, let me know down in the comments, because I'm not necessarily a rock expert, even though I like science. When all the surface activities are completed, we can head back into orbit. As you most likely noticed, we are definitely not equatorial, so I had a bit of a trouble getting back into the proper path, because going back into orbit is actually very easy, especially on something like POL, but I had to incline my orbit correctly to be able to even rendezvous with the ship. And as you can see, my ascent wasn't as good as I hoped, but we got the inclination sort of right. That was 156 or 155 degrees inclination, so we had to account for that. And after a bit of time warping, the two ships can meet again in orbit. So we're just going to burn retrograde and then towards target and retrograde again until we get really close, where we can basically lose all of our velocity, point the ships together, like face the docking ports, burn a little bit, and we can dock back. So let's transfer our Valentina back into the Soyuz, and let's pump all of our fuel, which is still glitchy because you have to click ins and outs like way too many times for comfort, because you can lose some fuel in the process and you have to do it again and again. But at the end, we were able to get the lander detached with no fuel on board, and the force of the decoupler actually deorbited the craft. And I think you can hear my dog doing some weird stuff in the background. I'm sorry if you do. So now, as you can see, I cannot create a maneuver node. So that means I can't really get back to Kerbin, can I? I mean, I could possibly force it and do it just by looking at the vehicle and the nav ball and possibly map screen, but we don't have enough fuel to force our Kerbin encounter from all the way from Jool, so I've built this rescue ship that you can see on your screen right now. And since that failed, I decided to dip the ship into the Joolian atmosphere. And I promise you guys there's gonna be some really nice views from inside the atmosphere, and somehow we are going to reach the surface. I was trying to enjoy some music in there, but it didn't really play out as well. So we're gonna turn that off soon. But yeah, my plan was to dock this ship into my Soyuz craft and get our Kerbals back to Kerbin pretty quickly. But as it turned out, the whole save file is probably just nuked, basically just nuked, and I couldn't really do anything with it. So, I actually made a poll on my community tab on YouTube, and some of you wanted me to basically use infinite fuel cheat, and at last I think the winning option was to just leave the Soyuz there for a future rescue mission, and after some of the glitches are addressed and fixed, we will actually get our Soyuz into POL orbit. I will adjust the inclination accordingly. We will have the proper amount of fuel like the Soyuz has now. I'll of course just cheat it into POL orbit because that part of the mission is technically done, and we will get it back either by burning correctly with maneuver nodes, or we will send this rescue ship or some other similar looking ship to the rescue and get our Kerbals safely onto Kerbin again. Now, I was kind of surprised because I don't really watch KSP except for very few people, and I was surprised that Jool actually has a surface that is solid, because usually a gas giant, oh yeah, that's one of the most beautiful views of the whole video. Usually a gas giant has no solid surface and it's just a liquid core with some gas clouds and stuff. So we will just crash the ship and the video is basically over, so thank you for watching and see you in the next one.